So, good evening. Can we start? Okay. So, welcome back to the second session or second part of the three-day symposium organized by the OFF-Biennale. The title of the second part is Network of Solidarity, and we will hear 4 presentations, 2 online. I hope there won't be any technical difficulties. And the topic is about, as the title suggests, network of solidarity. We were talking about several terms in relation to Lungbung, but we probably didn't really emphasize the term solidarity, which was very important during the document as well, when a few Lungbung members accused, racist attitudes. I don't go into detail, and this panel is, or this section is not really about that, but the solidarity as a term, I think, could be added into the Lungbung vocabulary, if we can say that. And in this part, there will be 4 presentations, and we will hear about different kind of practices in relation to the solidarity and in relation to how to build networks based on the solidarity. Also, how to build communities in the local ecosystem and also in the international ecosystem. But also we can somehow approach this term solidarity or the network of solidarity in a theoretical way. We will also have a presentation about ethnofuturism, which is rather a theoretical term. And I would like to briefly introduce our first presenter, Kateryna Aliinyk, who is an artist based in Ukraine. And she's mainly working with paintings and texts, and her topics revolves around the war and occupation of Donbass through images of nature. Kateryna graduated from the National Academy of Fine Arts and Architecture in 2021 with a master's degree in painting. She participated in several exhibitions. And it's really important to mention that she's one of the participants of the exhibition untitled On Violence, and it's curated by Livia Paldi. And tomorrow we will have a guided tour by Livia at the Budapest Gallery from 11 o'clock. You are all welcome. The title of Kateryna's presentation is What Was Planted, What Was Sprouted? And I give the mic to you.
Yes, we need visuals. Oh. This one is not mine. Yes. How can I, make it big and then just control? I also, before I start, I want to mention that I'm from Ukraine, from Luhansk. And the war hit my hometown in 2014, so the war still lasts. And me and my part of my family had to leave. So today I want to tell a story which is linked to the title of this symposium. A story exactly about how it is to be civil in an uncivil society. I think this will perfectly show how this season of darkness lasts for 9 years already for me, my family on the other side of the border, and millions of other Ukrainians. And it's a story about not so visible and slow violence that creeps into the spheres of everyday life and stays there. And we talk and hear a lot about collective experiences, but when personal ones are extracted and reviewed closely, it's always easier to relate and understand. And I will end my speech by reading a fragment of my text, Who Else Eats Life with Spoons? Text about traveling to occupied Luhansk every summer from 2015 to 2020. So, since 2014, there have been a lot of myths about Donbass, not only abroad, but also inside Ukraine. The majority of them emerged after the 2014 occupation and slowly started to vanish with the beginning of the full-scale invasion last February. One of the major questions aimed towards people from newly formed unrecognized republics was, why do they stay on the occupied by Russia territories? Probably they are happy with the way things are there, and the bitter truth is that some of them are. But again, not all of them, and that was my main starting point in my practice dedicated to Donbass. Not all decisions to stay are always about politics. Mostly it's about things like attachment to the land and soil, inability to leave your home in which you put so much effort and have rooted there. And this bond sometimes is so strong that it's beyond logic or safety. And the broad realization of it, unfortunately, came when other parts of Ukraine were also faced with making this decision after the 24th February. Mostly it relates to elderly people. When the full-scale invasion started, a very fatalistic saying emerged in Ukraine, "Yebane to yebane," which can be translated as, if it hits, it fucking hits. And it turned out it was easier for many people to take this approach than live in the place where they spent all their life, even if it's not the same anymore. And since we are no longer approaching this topic from the side of logic, it should be noted that in order to understand the real scale of the processes and consequences this war brought, one must pay attention to the smallest details, to the places and experiences on which big narratives break their teeth. Donbass tends to be seen as a powerful industrial region throughout the history of Ukraine, but there is a huge agricultural side to it. And garden labor is a huge part of the majority of people, not only there, but around Ukraine. We tend to see our relationships with the landscape, especially with one from our childhood, as more permanent than relationships with people. And when this connection is interrupted, to say it feels surreal is to say nothing. Maybe you saw a work at Documenta 15 about Armenians who were expelled from their lands. And all they left with was only songs about the stolen landscape, about the memory of the mountain's beauty, the valleys full of walnut trees, and the impossibility of coming back. But I had a chance to visit my hometown at least 5 times after occupation. And on my way there, I always thought, why is it so scary to look at a landscape now, if it looks almost the same, sometimes even better? Probably beneath this flourishing greenery, we most likely will find evidence of war crimes. It is scary because inside the ground, the distance between layers of all atrocities, where many of them happening, It is scary because inside the ground, the distance between layers of all atrocities, there were many of them happening on lands of Eastern Ukraine during the last 100 years, is too short. At first glance, landscapes where no one ventures anymore can appear to undergo a revival because people have stopped visiting. But even if a landscape does not seem to retain traces of tragedy for long, in the end, a closer look usually reveals its presence. Artillery warfare, landmines, and blood change the soil significantly over time. Even in agricultural spaces, landmines, wreckage from rockets, and human remains still forcibly coexist alongside edible plants. Eastern and southern Ukraine are also well known for the most fertile soil. For 9 years already, it's also well known for being destroyed the most by Russians. This overlap reminds that every battlefield is just a field in the first place, and Ukrainians still try their best to preserve the original purpose. But now we are all worried whether the harvest is edible, or had we just lost our appetites? Are the traces on the ground from agricultural or war vehicles? And lots of other questions we must think about on a daily basis, constantly expecting danger. It is very common in Ukraine to own a patch of land. And for people who are not farmers in the first place, gardening is mostly a therapeutic activity. And during the wartime, it actually became even more therapeutic and somehow symbolic. Exactly at the time of regular visit in occupied Luhansk, I also noticed that domestic labor, especially working in the gardens, which for many people were the reason to stay, became the most powerful tool of resistance through maintaining normal life while waiting for liberation. Such activities like watering plants between shellings or taking domestic animals to the bomb shelters back in 2014 with my family were all about kindness and care, not only to each other, but also to non-humans. No surprise that private patches of land became almost the last areas of control over someone's life. And from my text, you will learn that during the wartime, acts of service became one of the strongest and valid love languages. I talk about these shifts because solidarity and compassion in such circumstances have shown themselves in full scale. Physical destruction of people, houses, fields, and cities leads to another destruction: loss of family and region history, loss of local dialects, loss of access to memories, loss of knowledge about fruits and vegetables preservations, specifics of cultivation of certain types of soil. This, as well as other components of non-material heritage, might be lost forever. But in some ways, so does an abandonment. What I mean is that during the wartime, we found ourselves in a paradoxical situation where in the end there is no right decision to make. Every scenario except for peace includes losing something big. And at this point, everyone decides what values the most. What you want to preserve. Staying means loss of agency. Living means letting all your property and belongings be ruined by neglectance or misappropriated by someone else. I hope after returning all territories back and witnessing all mutations and transformation happening there, we will find a gentle and compassionate way to integrate people back to civil life in truly civil society. So now I will read a piece of my text. Often, the memories of home emerge in pairs or as paradoxes and are divided into categories: before the beginning of war, after, and scenes that are outside of time. For example, I had a utility pole behind my yard where an old rotten piece of timber was strapped to a concrete post with metal wire. A woodpecker always landed on the pole to pull out bugs. The post was planted in a clay berm. There is a lot of clay in Donbass in general. As a child, my favorite confection was a layer cake made of different type of soil, the black earth chernozem from the garden and clay from that mound, that cut sections of which looked beautiful and appetizing. Sometimes I could even take the liquid mud from the puddle outside the gate and pour it over the cake like icing, but only if it had rained before. On a similar but higher hill stands the house of my grandmother's colleague from the market. In 2015, she was spotted crawling on her belly on that snow-wet hill. It turned out she got drunk while discussing politics at work, and on her way back home, she thought tanks were coming at her from behind the hill. Besides the clay, there is a lot of salt in the Donbas soil. That's why we say that the potatoes grow already salted. You just need to boil them. The tastiest variety is called Bela Rosa. A lot of the time we eat only potatoes. Even when you are already sick of it, you are not allowed to throw them away. To avoid upsetting my great-grandmother, we put them in a bag and hid them in the end of the garden in the dead of night. We dig the potatoes up during the day and bury them back at night. Mount Karachun, I forgot about my presentation. Okay. Mount Karachun could be seen from the garden, and my whole childhood I always wanted to get to it and climb it. But all our time was taken up by potatoes. The grown-up said, "You'll climb it when you grow up." Of course, I grown up, but all the access has been mined for a long time already, and now it's completely unclear what's happening there. And now's not the time for climbing the mount anyway. Yet, I think about other scenes as well, not just about the landscape. Once, an old man died before my eyes while queuing at the Stanitsa Luhanska checkpoint. He simply broke down, went to a toilet room, and died. And those elderly people go back and forth all the time. To buy butter in Stanitsa, the tomatoes are tastier there, to withdraw their pension from the ATMs, and they die in a queue. But it's someone's grandfather, do you understand? It's not a joke. And thousands of people stand there, and you stand there with them and bring bags with you. 15 kilos of Persil detergent, as grandmother ordered. So bring Persil 10 kilos a year, but if you bring more, well, great then. Grandpa wants the Bieleczka candy, 5 kilos. We'll bring it. What else do you want? Well, then take 3 little buckets of butter and something else we forgot. Pills? Okay, we'll take the pills, of course. Let's go. What other blessings of civilization are available besides laundry detergent? So, long story short, we are dragging all this with my mother and sister. The separatists always search the bags and check our phones. We carry all this like idiots in the heat across 1 kilometer buffer zone. Mom has a dog with her. He's hot and doesn't want to walk on his own. And besides him, we are dragging this detergent on our shoulders. Excuse me for this detergent obsession, but everything weighs so much that it seems as we are carrying a whole human body with our hands. We walk further, and there are signs all over the place. Mines, mines, mines. We walk along this fucked up road and deliver the detergent. Everyone is happy. Do you think we are going back light-handed? Maybe without bags? No. Let's bring the 150 jars of tomato sauce from grandmother's garden. Let's take it. Load the bags up, Granny. Give us 3 boxes of grapes too, this year's juicy crop. The grapes will, of course, squash on our way, and no one will eat them at the dorm, and Mom will call and say, "Well, at least make a smoothie from them. Grandfather grew it. Don't throw it away." Okay. And Mom continues, "Why don't we put the tomato sauce from Luhansk into a borscht? We'll take it. What about 3 bags of dried apricots? Let's take it." And as we return with these bags, every time I think, well, this time either I or Mom will have a hernia, and the navel will come loose 100%. It seems like I already have a hernia. Or is this just feeling so imprinted on my subcortex? In Germany, I also bought some candy so that my friend couldn't pass it on to my family. The date syrup, some or other worthless crap from here. God, it's so pathetic. I think about it every time and again today as I come into a shop. I'm so pathetic. I bought them some stupid candy. Just like when we brought the detergent to Luhansk, the Bieleczka candy. Same here in Germany, but in return, I get a different candy, Huyeleczka. Same agenda. How did we get to a point when our feckless, displaced lives revolve around candy? It's so ridiculous. What even is value to us? Germans will never understand this. You have to be truly pathetic and sick to bring 15 kilos of Persil detergent through the checkpoints under the barrel of a gun. I am ashamed to tell this to anyone and don't want them to know what everything really looks like and what we do. What are you bringing? Persil and back, tomato sauce from the garden and 150 jars. And then at her Kyiv apartment, Mom loads my bag with this tomato sauce and says, "Will somebody at least meet you at the bus?" Of course they will. So I walk, and the dorm is on Mount Everest, and the staircase is long as hell, and I ask over the phone, "Could you help me with the bags?" Not today. I'm busy, bye. And I'm dragging this tomato sauce on my shoulders further, like in Luhansk along this 1 kilometer passage between mines, until I get to the dorm's doorstep, and everyone then eats it, shits it out, and goes to sleep. No one even helped me with the bags. No one fucking knows how it was for me. I stood in a queue with this tomato sauce under the 40-degree heat, and nobody even knows. Everyone is from other parts of Ukraine. No one is interested in these household issues. I was thinking in that queue, how could anyone affect my life while I was standing with Persil under 40-degree Donbas heat? But in reality, all those thoughts evaporated from my head as soon as the bags touched the floor of my home. Then what are we talking about anyway? And it's not just about tomato sauce. The grandparents also have nuts. A walnut at home is sublime. The family that lived next door didn't cut back the brush since they were too busy having children to get more welfare money. So a walnut tree had grown. But no self-respecting Luhansk resident would plant a walnut in their yard. They always plant black cherries, and they do it in such a way that, God forbid, the neighbors would be able to reach and pick them. They are allowed to only look at those trees. They also plant cobnuts and maybe blackberries and peaches. The walnut's place is behind the yard near mulberry, apricots, and the Belaina leaf apples. Walnut leaves don't rot for years. If they are not cleaned up, they will lie there in layers. Anyway, a giant branchy walnut grew over our house. On the way back from Luhansk, it's always like 5 kilos of nuts. Should we take it? Pff, let's take it. Mom says nuts for women's health are the best. Katya, did you eat few nuts this morning? Sure. I've been drinking and smoking anything that burns all evening, but of course had some nuts in the morning. But at home, those nuts were always lying around like garbage. So far, Eastern Ukrainians haven't been particularly seduced by the walnuts. But now, my grandparents hug them all year round, waiting for the summer to load them into our boxes, to go with the tomatoes and grapes. We bring those nuts to Kyiv. Grandma also picked and dried some tea, a classy mint that grows at home. We call it menthol. This time, Mom brought the tea to Warsaw. It was right during this time in Poland when I made friends with a Mexican artist. And all we did together while drinking beer was discuss family history and agricultural heritage. I decided to give her the last bag of this tea from Luhansk as a gift. She treated this gesture very respectfully. Refreshing, I drink it only once a day to extend the pleasure. I understand what it means to you. At the same time, I shared the walnuts with the German girl. Danke. These are the nuts from Luhansk. Think about it, my friend. Grandma husked them and Mom carried them out at a gunpoint. Of course, no one asked me for this. Overall, I should know the limits to my sentiments. For women's health, you are welcome. This summer was the first time since 2014 where none of us were able to come to Luhansk, but the tomato harvest was richer than ever. Poor grandma had to jar them on her own. We used to always help her, but this time nobody could. Not only did grandpa not help, he didn't even verbally support her. And what's interesting is that we had so many opportunities to bring the family photo albums, diaries, and video recordings to Kyiv, But for some reason, we've been only interested in the unsustainable heritage. It was either 8 dozen of eggs or 2 buckets of frozen raspberry from the front garden, and anything else we had enough imagination and hands for. Throughout time, while looking at those infantile gestures of love and care, I think nobody had doubts we were going to come back. Everything's at home where it's supposed to be. Instead, we've been busting our guts out to carry these treats from a bunny, like it's nothing. Grandmother always told me, we are the commoners, and big hands are the peasant's feature. I happen to have big palms, and I always dreamt they were for carrying my loved ones in my arms. Yet, carrying bags for loved ones also feels good. And despite the hardship of standing in a queue there and back again, I'm particularly willing to be a good daughter, granddaughter, and sister, to be a decent refugee, and to love Ukraine. And my house is a 15-minute drive from the center of Luhansk. But this summer, a steppe vulture attacked a chicken in our yard. All these talks about what was planted, what has sprouted, are the only news we aren't afraid to discuss over the phone. We didn't discuss anything important when we used to meet either. We mostly focused on deciding what would fit in the bags. And now, I don't know when we'll get a chance to meet next time. There is a sort of almost overripe knowledge and memories that, if not plucked in time, will just fall down and rot. But I don't even want to think about it.
Thank you very much. I forgot to mention that the structure of this part would be like 20-minute presentation and 5 minutes Q&A. So now it's time for questions. I wonder if anyone has a question, comment to Kateryna. While you are thinking, maybe I can ask one question about the relationship between the paintings and the text, and particularly about the text, where you can distribute or publish these short novels, if I can use this word, and if you are publishing it in English, or so what is the way of publishing?
Okay, I will start from answering for the second question. It's already published in Ukraine, and as you listen to this text, you probably understood that it's more inner reader oriented, because not a lot of people, know about how things are. And in partnership with Assortimentna Kimnata in Ivano-Frankivsk and 89 books publishing in Palermo, we will make also English version with my colleague, curator from Donetsk, Daša Chechasova. We made the book together, yeah. And in relation to my paintings, as you probably saw, that I'm really into close-ups because this text is also a pure close-up. And as I said, that nature, it actually changes very fast, and the landscape doesn't keep the traces of the tragedy for a long time. And I'm just, trying to, to notice these small things like presence of violence and war in such things like, just peaceful landscape or some household chores, domestic chores people have, because all this, story with tomato sauce, it's actually a very big stupidity if to logically think about it. But yeah, so for example, this one Ukrainian garden, probably a lot of Ukrainian gardens now contain all this together. like, you know, human remains and debris from rockets and all that stuff. So yeah, the biggest relation is how violent and peaceful things coexist together. That's basically like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any questions? No? If not, thank you very much for your presentation. And okay, just 1 second. So the next, maybe I can sit. So, our next guest is Daša Anosova. Daša is a researcher and culture worker from Kyiv, Ukraine, but she's currently living in London, where she's doing her PhD studies at the UCL. Her research is focused on the operational strategies and aesthetic political vocabulary developed by Ukrainian art and cultural initiatives. Daša is a co-curator of the show I'm Not Here to Be Stronger Than You, now on display at Mimosa House, London. Together with Vlada Vasilevsky, I hope I pronounce okay, she's a co-occupier of the PPV, Preventing the Power Vertical seminar and event platform at the University College London. And his presentation will be about the artist collectives and culture networks for the reconstruction of Ukraine. So,
thanks so much. Yours. Thanks so much for your kind introduction. I just want to take an opportunity to thank all the organizers for putting up this amazing event and bringing together so many great speakers. I've already learned a lot today. In relation to my research, and I would probably need help with my presentation as well, I think, to get it started and to find it somewhere. While there are some technical issues and we're trying to find the presentation, I can briefly introduce why the name of my talk is so lengthy and actually outline a little bit of my interest as a researcher based at the University College London School of Slavonic and East European Studies, which is a really problematic naming, which has been already raised today. Both being Slavonic and East European, of course in comparison to other colleagues in Oxford and Cambridge that have Russian studies in their naming. So when we were discussing with the organizing committee for me what to present on, I had this really difficult split because on the one hand I'm really interested in my location in London and my location being based as a researcher at the UCLCs because last year, me and my colleague, we've been trying to pervert it in every way possible. No? Okay. By various means, basically occupying the platform which is itself called Perverting the Power Vertical and that is engaged with politics and aesthetics in the so-called, and I quote, Global East. So we were trying to problematize it for a year and trying to think about it, and it was really interesting for me to hear that these questions are also problematized and raised here, and I'm looking forward for the panel Decolonizing Institutions, which is happening tomorrow, I think, to explore this even further. Sorry. Yes, sure. But how do I do it?
Can you show me?
Yeah, it's right here.
Yeah.
So that is what I'm not going to focus on. But this is something what I would love to discuss maybe outside of the presentation time, because I'm really interested in this. But I really, what I want to focus on in the presentation is, relates directly to the field of my research, and I just hope to have an opportunity to display it. Otherwise I can just follow without any visuals. Beautiful, thanks so much. Okay, I think it looks okay. I don't have any notes here, so it's going to be fine. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So the focus of my presentation directly relates to my research, and my department is quite a peculiar department apart from its weird naming. It is not a discipline-based based department, it's an area studies department, which is interdisciplinary. So people would pursue researches based in area, but then taking methods from various disciplines, such as mine, for example, is based at the same time in anthropology, sociology, cultural research, and what's not. And in my research, I am interested in artist collectives and cultural networks and all those words that are being explored, cultural units, organizations, self-organizations, which I thought of as being Ukrainian, also whatever that means, being diasporic Ukrainian, Ukrainian as based in Ukraine, self-identifying as Ukrainian. And their operational strategies, so what they do, especially since 2022, the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, and they're restructuring or completely abandoning their cultural or artistic activity into voluntary work, military service, and other types of activities. And here I wanted to also reflect on what was discussed at the previous panel of the human surplus that was really interesting for me to hear, given that in the region so many artists, architects, curators, designers, culture workers are opting out of culture production in order to join military forces or voluntary work. And these are two main questions that I'm interested in my research. I'm not going to read them off the slide, but I hear a lot of resonance in what has been discussed today, and I'm trying to research into how these collectives have used the existent infrastructures and existent networks in order to survive now. A good example was also discussed today at the panel and introduced by Serge, how Kyiv Biennial has restructured their activities into fundraising and help to cultural workers, for instance. But today, of course, as a PhD researcher, I look at various cases, and there are tens of them. And of course, I cannot speak of all of them, and I want to apologize in advance for anyone listening that I'm not speaking about their activity, which is definitely valid and amazing and interesting for research and for archival practice. But what I want to present today is this collective called Undestructures, which is a Ukrainian collective, and none of its participants is present in the photos. Because this collective is understand itself as an understructure, as something invisible that supports other structures, and I really want to read a part of their manifesto, how they identify themselves. Just a second. I apologize for a really, maybe not really good translation of it. So the part of their manifesto: we are not an artistic expression, architectural studies, social project, or object of design. Above all, we are creatures of necessity, born of collective and limited coexistence. Our existence is temporary, changeable, and worthless. Born into this world in conditions of limitation and need, formed from construction debris and remnants, we live a short life, after which we dissolve again into garbage. Like a material thing that come from nothingness and return to nothingness, we only temporarily exist between remains and remains. Substructures have no plans, have no blueprints or diagrams. A working body born on the spot, learn to speak, move, and interact with the surrounding world each time. Understructures are newborn bodies from fragments of old bodies. These bodies grow, work, argue, and ultimately celebrate. We are not protagonists, we are supporting actors. We want to support and help, relieve and comfort, hug and be there. We want to be reliable, temporary helpers, shaky, stable supporters. Nothing is more important than this necessity. Basically, it's a collective that formed in 2020 and were collecting found furniture at the construction sites, and then took part in Tbilisi Biennial and various other mega platforms and institutions, and then built some understructures from found materials themselves as a practice. Held a residency in Slavutic where they collaborated with construction workers and local communities, then presented everything at aforementioned Tbilisi Biennial, and that is basically was their practice. and the working body was really not stable. So it, reflecting on their manifesto, it wasn't a surprise. Then in 2022, I'm changing the slides on my laptop and not on the. Just a moment. Okay. So these are basically the objects, the found objects at construction sites, and that is the Tbilisi biennial setup of the collective. And then in February 2022, it wasn't a surprise when we reflect on their manifesto that half of the collective joined the reconstruction effort in the recently deoccupied territories of Kiev region, and started helping with this. Sorry, must be a video, a beautiful video of them taking up the thing. Started taking part in the reconstruction of the recently deoccupied territories, with coming into regions and building up everything what has been destroyed by the Russian military forces, including roofs, windows, and other built environment. And then here, really, for me as a researcher, interesting question arises how they were funding the reconstruction, because also this question of finding resources and acting immediately seems to be a really sharp one. So the Understructures Collective utilized their network of hyper-capitalist contemporary art institutions and platforms in order to fundraise for the reconstruction effort. And for that task, the collective has produced a publication which is called Oberiх, which is an amazing publication, and it has to be another presentation on it, which is a collection of stories of people from Ukraine on objects that protect them. That's a direct translation of Oberich. And the Oberich was published in an edition of 1,000 copies, and then it was sold everywhere around Europe and the UK in order to fundraise and in order to fundraise for the reconstruction effort. So 100% of sales was transferred to the reconstruction, which was happening on the spot in Kyiv. And here are some examples. A spread of the book, which includes an interesting take from various actors of the art and culture community. And then Oberich was presented at such huge platforms at Art Basel and semi-occupied spaces in Berlin as Fortunawetter, which is a semi-squatted casino, and everywhere. And here in Copenhagen, you can also see some understructure tables which were built from found materials in Copenhagen. So basically all the practice is continuing, but then for another reason. Another example of Oberich sales in Paris. And this one, I think, is the last. There were many, many more, but this one is a collaboration with another collective theater of hopes and expectations that was built in Düsseldorf by a collective of Ukrainian filmmakers, artists, theater producers that also, for that period, stopped producing culture as they used to be doing, and built this theater right in the middle of Düsseldorf, and right in the center of Düsseldorf, to provide cultural diplomacy. So to speak about the war and to speak about what was happening in Ukraine, but also primarily to fundraise for the reconstruction effort. And here I think I'll come to an end, and here are some conceptualizations that I'm thinking about when I look at such practices. And then, of course, there are effective communities and counterpublics and undercommons. And then Lumbung is also an interesting term that I haven't been acquainted to that well, but I am really curious in exploring. And also Taloka and all other words, vernacular concepts. I think it's more, it's really important to look at the practice, at the local practice, and use the concepts from the local context. And to finish off, I also think that the term understructures is a really good term to think about and to practice as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Daša. First, I'd like to ask the audience if there's any question, comments. Please ask.
Sorry, could you sorry. Yeah. Yeah, it is. I think it's the last week on. It's been there for a month. It's at Mimosa House. Please, if you have an opportunity, come by. It features 2 Ukrainian artists, and I co-curated it with another Ukrainian curator who is based in Belgium. But it is not related to what I have talked about today. However, it relates a lot to the exhibition that I am super excited to see tomorrow with the curator and because I think it relates to the communication on violence quite directly.
I'd like to ask one of the projects you mentioned, the Theater of Hope and Expectations. I hope I remember well the title. How sustainable they could be? Of course, they depend on fundings and maybe project-based, but how it could be like a kind of strategy of, for the networks of solidarity and how it functions.
I love their idea. They're actually working with, because they're theater producers, they're working with the remnants of theater productions. So they're utilizing second-hand theater decorations to build it. And I think there are many. In Germany, as I am concerned, theater production, if not thrives, but is quite common, and there are many theater productions that are willing to donate their used decorations. Of course, there must be some funding and access to public spaces to build such constructions, and that's a whole another question, especially in Germany and in the EU, where the bureaucratic process could be at times daunting.
So it wasn't not only one occasion, so they are continuing this type of projects.
They did it over summer and they closed it at the moment, but they're interested in continuing, yes. Mm-hmm. As far as I know, till today. Mm-hmm. It's better to speak with them.
Yeah. Maybe another question, if there's no question from the audience, yes?
I wanted to actually ask you a bit more about the collective understructures, because you mentioned that, they were not on the photo because they choose invisibility, and I wanted to kind of dig a bit deeper into that, so how the collective functions, also if it's a bigger group or a smaller group, how is it accessible? For example, you mentioned that they work with different communities and construction workers, and then also I was kind of curious because of this strategy of using the hyper-capitalist art market to finance reconstruction. In this I mean, in the current situation, but I always also was wondering if it's maybe a long-term strategy that they have. So how do they redistribute also within the collective and with the groups that they work with? If you could say more about that.
Yes, thank you. I think I just rushed a bit and didn't say that at the moment half of the collective, there are four people who are based in Ukraine. They're doing voluntary work in recently deoccupied Kherson, and they're based in Kyiv, but they go to Kherson to help people who are unwilling or unable to evacuate. These are people with special needs, with disabilities, older people, and they are delivering humanitarian aid, medicine. Most of it is just everyday medicine that, like analgin or something like that, so it's not some special type of help. So the collective decides that now this activity is the most urgent, and all other culture-related activities which are easy to conduct abroad in the EU or in the UK or in the States, all funds coming from there are allocated to these trips, and everyone agrees on this at the moment. Answering your question on how to join or who are the participants, anyone willing to connect can join. That is a common practice, but mostly, of course, there is a core collective based in Kyiv. There's 2 people, and they are trying to negotiate with friends who are now dispersed around the globe and who happen to be culture workers. But then a lot of, as me being an active participant in these activities, I know that some collectives or initiatives that sprang up after February 2022, they reach out. So they reach out and ask how we can help, and we see the work you've been doing. So we really want to, for example, sell the book in our space.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, thank you very much, Daša, for the presentation.
Thanks for having me.
And now we will turn to the online presentation. I need some help. Right. Thank you. So the third guest is Matthias Einhoff. You already met him in the first panel, but for those who didn't join from the beginning, I would like to introduce shortly him. Matthias is a co-founder and director of the ZKU, Center for Arts and Urbanistics, an interdisciplinary hub for urban research and artistic practice, located in a former railway station in Berlin. ZKU was also one of the members of the Lumbung Interlocal and took part in the Documenta. Matthias is a co-founder of numerous learning platforms and publications such as ZK, CT Toolbox, and many more. He has been a visiting professor and teacher in Berlin, in Kassel, and in Basel. He recently was elected representative for the Council of Arts in Berlin. Matthias is a board member of Haus der Statistik, and also he's co-moderating the process and has co-directed Statista Public Arts section. And today, he's going to talk about the networks of mutuality, trust, and resource sharing in the Berlin ecosystem.
Thank you very much.
Are you here? Okay, yes.
Yes, I hear you, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Radio. Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting us and inviting ZKU to this talk. And your invitation actually took me onto some kind of trip on a journey through looking at what solidarity actually means within the Berlin context, and that brought me to not give you like a classic presentation of, you know, what's happening in the Berlin scene, how through mutual support people are developing spaces, art space pop up by mutuality and so on. There's plenty of stories that we will walk out after 20 minutes and all feel good. But I decided to actually just dig a little deeper, because it's, while looking at trying to understand what mutuality and the original term that we had proposed was solidarity really means, I did come across some really interesting insights, and I just wanted to share them, not so much as an opinion, but to open sort of a little bit the view onto art making as an act of solidarity, as an act of mutuality. So I will do this now, and I will share my screen, and please let me know if there's any trouble in seeing my screen. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Is that possible to give me access to the screen sharing? That'd be great. Oh no, it doesn't work. So yeah, that's a bit of a problem. Could you give me some feedback if that problem can be solved, or whether we...
We are working on that. Can you hear me,
Okay,
Matthias?
thanks.
We are working.
Yeah, now I hear you. Perfect. Thanks a lot.
I hope it works now. Would you please check it?
It does work.
Thank you.
Indeed. That's great. Thanks so much. So let me just see if that works now. So here I am. I hope you see the headline: Networks of Mutuality, Trust and Resource Sharing in the Berlin Ecosystem. Does that work?
Yes.
Great, thanks a lot. Okay, as I said, I went onto this journey, and it was a funny journey, because exactly on the same day that your invitation came in to give a contribution to that, I went shopping, and I came into a local discounter. I wanted to, among other things, buy some eggs. So do you see the next picture? So I wanted to buy these eggs, and suddenly this out of solidarity on eggs popped up. And I was really curious, like, okay, what the heck? What the solidarity, the idea that I have around solidarity have to do with eggs? And I dug a little bit deeper into what was going on, and I saw that by buying these eggs, I show solidarity with the farmers, egg farmers from the Netherlands that produce these eggs, because they had to put their hens, instead of letting them outside, into keep them inside for EU regulation reasons. And that's because EU regulation told them to do so. I'm showing solidarity by still buying these eggs, although the chickens are inside. That really blasted my brain, and how hollow the term solidarity had become, of course, through inflation by commercial use. And of course, and we are all familiar with, the other products of solidarity, like beer, that is the Soli beer, which 10 cents of every beer goes into a social project, or the Solimate, of also where the parts of the income go into projects that are considered solidaric. And it even goes so far as that, for example, the Berlin Senate has created a new instrument, which is called Solidaric Basic Income, which sounds familiar and very positive, would resonate a lot within the art scene, to establish a basic income. But in fact, it's a euphemism for putting long-term unemployed back into work. So my sort of, idea of solidarity is very often, is very far away from what I, when digging into the term deeper, saw there. So I try to make a little bit more sense of solidarity as a term, and I looked into what the academic discourse has to say about this. And academic discourse, and here I just show you this picture because it says Begriff und Problem, which is terminology, and problem. So the problem that science has with the term solidarity, to put it in a nutshell, is it's very, very different to put borders to the term solidarity. Like, what kind of solidarity are we talking about among a small group of peers? A nation state that shows solidarity with the weak, global solidarity among people that have the same belief. So that is a basic problem that science has. But I did come to some conclusions that social sciences and sociobiologists came up with that I found pretty compelling and interesting. That the idea of self-interest and solidarity are not contradictory antagonists. Now, I'm taking you onto this journey. I'm going a bit further. What are they trying to say? And then maybe here the visualization gives you an idea that if workers that organize in unions can follow their self-interest of having higher wages by displaying and being solidaric with other workers. So, for example, some might already be on a higher wage level and they're still solidaric with others who are not yet there. And so it's in their mutual interest to do so. And I found that very interesting, that self-interest is really not an antagonist of solidarity. And I try to, from all the different academic systems that were created for the term solidarity, extract three main ones. And I think I got across three main ones which are relevant for what we do as artists, which is mutualism, and I hope you can see the slide right here. Mutualism, I put a piece in bronze by Ernst Barlach, The Blind and the Lame, to it because it really fits to the idea of mutualism, is an investment into a common behavior with immediate expectation for gaining from it. So very simply said, people that in the same sports team play together expect to help each other, and they will together win and have a gain from it. And the individual couldn't reach what the group reaches there, and everyone benefits directly from working together on this. This is and I found really funny and interesting examples for mutualism, like team sport, of course, as I mentioned, big game hunting is considered one example for that among humans, and Star Alliance, which, who's familiar with that, with flying their Star Alliance, they cooperate and they all gain from it by, showing each other and supporting each other on a commercial level. So mutualism is something that very often happens in the work that we do, and I'll come to that later. Then there is the reciprocal altruism, which is very similar to mutualism. I find that also super interesting. It's just a tiny dimension between and the element of trust in there. So for example, your neighbor's house burns, you help that person, although you wouldn't have to because it's not your house, but you hope that when your house burns, that the neighbor will come and help you also solve the problem. So this takes, of course, the element of trust into the game, and that's also something that I would say often happens in the world that we work in. And then third and last, and there's plenty more, but I just wanted to, give you a bit of a horizon what's happening underneath the term solidarity, is the prestige accumulation. Now, prestige accumulation is very, very interesting, and it's also something very relevant, and I'll show you later in some examples. So you invest into communicative reliability. So what you are so I took this picture because the animal in this particular case invests into something that is not immediately helpful. It takes a lot of energy and makes him more endangered, to be caught by predators, can't run that fast, but that animal displays the abundance. And abundance means, and there's a really interesting term for that, is you display a handicap. So deliberately you show that you, even though you have a handicap, are still there. And which means you are incredibly fit. And that makes you attractive. And this is really interesting. In the human world, it would look like this. A donation of a specific sum that you give to an organization, and you display that you have abundance, although you will have less money. And so these are all kind of how academic discourse defines solidarity, or tries to, create a system around solidarity. Now, for the work that we do, what does that mean? We, in a way, and this is always the feeling, we have create artistic models of solidarity, or rather of mutuality. I try to already hint towards that in the title for what we're talking about today. And one of the pieces that we created for the documenta last year was this citizenship, this boat that we created from the roof of our building. And this boat heavily relied on mutualism in the sense that the only way to move, not the only way, but one of the ways to move forward was by pedaling. And maybe I'll just briefly show you a video of how these people cooperate. I hope it works. So these guys, so as you can see, these people are struggling and to move the ship forward. What you cannot see is that actually the ship is moving incredibly slow, like almost not. And if even one of these people would stop doing what they're doing, the ship wouldn't move forward, it would start moving backward because it's going upstream. So it's an infrastructure that displays mutuality. It's like showing that mutuality is something beneficial for the community. And I find that interesting. But at the same time, I came across a picture in our documentation that also shows another sort of reason for solidarity, which I mentioned earlier, the prestige communication. And it's a sad picture of myself, who also hands out something, displays some kind of how well we've worked together, and I'm the beneficiary of that prestige. So that's also, so I when going through these different projects in the Berlin ecosystem and with this sort of structure in the back of my head, it was just very helpful to see that solidarity works on different levels. Another sort of infrastructure that displays mutuality or solidarity is a project that we created just like 3 years earlier, which is the so-called critical mass mobile, which had a similar principle, which is a bus that would only move forward if everyone would carry the bus. And so there was a kind of scaffolding that we put together with some meshes around it, and it was a bus that went from one endangered space in Berlin to another endangered space, and it was a huge mess. It's similar to the citizenship because the whole infrastructure was pretty heavy, and whenever really somebody gave up carrying, the whole thing collapsed. So from this, let's say, smaller models of displaying mutuality or solidarity, in Berlin, we are working on and have been working on for the last 6 years on a project that I guess many of you are familiar with and that I've presented many times, is the so-called Haus der Statistik. And it did work also with these principles of solidarity in many different layers. Haus der Statistik, just very briefly and in a nutshell, for those who are not familiar with the project, has been a vacancy of 50,000 square meters, actually even more, that's been standing empty for more than 8 years in the middle of the center of Berlin. It's a former GDR building for the administration of statistics. And as an artistic intervention, we, together with other artists, groups in Berlin, stood together in front of the building and created a sign that claims that this space will be developed in future, which was a lie, and that it will become a space for art, culture, and social activities. Now, one of the pressure points why this whole thing became successful was that we claimed, and we actually are fulfill this also, solidarity with people that don't have housing or access to housing. So we used the idea of solidarity to communicate this project in the sense that it was very difficult to stand against it. And what we did in the wake of developing this project and that displays solidarity was create first off a workshop that was in the beginning open basically 24/7 to anyone without restrictions of entrance, and then creating smaller islands where we show how people can work together without commercial ideals, with the ideals of solidarity helping those who don't have access to these kinds of infrastructures, and displaying and solidarity in very small pockets. So I would, these small sort of pockets, I would rather call infrastructures of mutuality. And to give you one kind of very concrete example, on the Haus der Statistik, on a small scale, how we try to create these infrastructures is this former bumper car structure. So in the backyard of Haus der Statistik, we bought from eBay bumper car structure. We placed it on a former parking lot, and we put some additions to it so it looks like, let's say, the small brother of the big house in the background. And this infrastructure in our heads was a kind of commons, for everyone to use without limitations, without having to book it, without having monetary without us having monetary needs on this. So just very open for the public. And this so-called Musterhaus, which is sort of a model house, became a super popular place, especially during the pandemic, for all different kinds of people that had to organize the space, clean the space, sort of in mutual sort of benefit. So mutualism, as I mentioned earlier, here plays a huge role. But yet again, while I was going through these projects, I came across the problem that we had with Haus der Statistik around the authorship. Because then 2 years later, a publication came out where it just wasn't mentioned that we created this piece of work, and we felt a little bit offended, and we're like, I don't know, we put all this work into this and no one even knows that we did it. And I just came to realize, yeah, this is sort of the effect of, not the effect, but the mechanism rather of the prestige accumulation problem, that we wanted to create something, display our generosity, but since our authorship wasn't clarified, we felt that the reciprocity didn't happen. However, going on a bigger scale of how mutuality can look like in this particular case, I wanted to just show you how the Haus der Statistik is going to be organized and how this idea of mutuality is going to be realized in architecture. So under normal circumstances, all the different usages that are going into this would be separated. So housing would be separated from arts and cultures, that new town hall that will be coming there would be separated from the administration, and so on and so forth. So core idea is, let's put everything together and make sure that the people in the administration make experiences with people from the arts field, since they're in the same building. And make sure that by creating the ground floors, that there is a secured interaction and there is an understanding of what the other people are doing by, going through the display of what the other people are doing. And this eventually will create, and we're in the middle of the construction right now, this neighborhood which allow for mutual understanding what the other ones are doing, and which will in the long run increase an understanding for the group that will be living on this compound. And these are not even anymore infrastructures of mutuality, these are really spaces of mutuality. And just finally, and to wrap this up a little bit, I wanted to take you to the next level. How can you, what we've been doing in kind of these small pockets, these pioneer usages, how can you formalize these infrastructures into something that is as big as Haus der Statistik is? And then it becomes formalizing this mutuality becomes really complicated, but really interesting. And I'm not going to go into detail here because I just wanted to show you that there's a huge amount of complexity if you want to formalize this lived mutuality that we're having right now into something that is legally binding and will last for the next 100 years. And so these are the kind of schemes that we are developing to make sure that, for example, the public realm or the public institutions will continue cooperating with the civic institutions that go inside, and the decision making and the financing of all the different activities that will be happening there is secured beyond the actors that are doing it right now. However, and this is just to finalize, of course, once again, I came across the fact, and one of the motivations why people do it and why we do this also is yet again always these pictures of what the academics call the prestige accumulation, where people hold up their certificates that they hand over to someone else because they can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthias. So first I'd like to ask the audience if there's any question or comment.
Oh, there must be questions, please.
Hello. Maybe you already mentioned this and I missed it, but I want to kind of go and ask about the compound, house their statistics. Once the compound is finished, who will start using or living or occupying the compound? And then maybe they will be there for permanently, maybe temporarily, but again, just to go back to the first slide, or one of the first slides that you showed, the idea of self-interest will probably play in this compound, which will then describe the compound to either or lean the compound to mutualism or prestige accumulation or solidarity. So this is more like an abstract idea at the end, to kind of pick a right terminology for the compound at this moment. But I want to kind of ask about who's going to use it, who will, is there a selection committee? And the self-interest in this.
And the self-interest in this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question. There is what we sort of demanded in the very beginning, spaces for arts, culture, and social activities, or Soziales, which is a little bit different in terminology, but is going to happen. So there will be, factually speaking, artist studios. There will be civil organizations which work in the social realm. But there will be also, and this is sort of what's in addition, administration. For example, the Berlin tax administration will be located there, and there will be the local town hall that will host the local parliament. So the usages that we had projected in the beginning will be there in this, but additional usages by the public sector will be there too. Our interest in the very beginning, and maybe now taking it back to this kind of model, is mutualism, in that sense that we invest a lot of energy into with other artists, all expecting that if we realize the fact that space will be created, that we can all move into this place. And by when I say we, I would rather talk of, like in the unions, like the artists being, as an abstract body of Berlin artists. And I think this goal, now that the space creation is happening, will be reached. Now, who chooses and this, will be getting into this? There is, I mean, this is a very practical kind of thing. There is a committee, and this committee consists of people, of representatives from the public sector, from the civic sector, from the artistic field. And these are people who are not invested into this project, who sort of don't have any interest in this project. So there will be a selection from people as neutral as possible. And I mean, coming back to also these three different, let's say, realms of solidarity, of course, and I think when I present the project, this idea of prestige accumulation is already inherent. I present it, you know, it's part of my social capital that I present this project. So even if, it would fail, I could even sell this as, you know, an artistic project and which has, you know, some, you know, was an experiment. So it is on the one side mutualism, you know, artists being mutually solidaric with one another. There is also reciprocal altruism in there because the timely dimension, I need to trust also if I invest a lot of energy now, that later maybe I won't be able to work on this for half a year because I'm working on Documenta. I will still have to hope that I won't be forgotten. And then there's the prestige accumulation that will happen, you know, just by me presenting this project.
So
I hope that answers
yeah. But one more question, again related to this. So the process of this compound is actually an example of prestige accumulation as well as mutualization as well as solidarity, but not the actual. Right. Not the actual. Once it's realized, it may not be an example of solidarity in terms of people occupying or living in the compound.
Yeah,
using the
I
compound.
think. I agree. The process is much more driven by the ethos of solidarity, whereas once it's established and formalized, I would have a hard time talking about solidarity. But yeah, formally speaking, you know, there are still a lot of elements of solidarity in there. Just to give you one example, you know, financing of the rents. So there will be the administration that will have to pay much higher rent than artists will have to pay for their studios. In return, that's at least how we argue, the administration will have the experience of working with artists and, you know, the displays that they do, the cultural sort of outputs that come out of this house will add quality to the life of the workers in the offices. So there's a kind of mutuality. On the one side, you know, they pay more rent, so artists have to pay less. On the other side, artists, you know, give them something back by the stuff that they do. So even once it's formalized, there are quite a lot of elements of what one could call mutuality in there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are run out of time, so thank you very much, Matthias, again. And I'd like to ask you to make co-host Zsolt the next presenter, because now you are the host, so you should make him co-host while I'm introducing him, if that's okay with you. Thank you. So the last presentation in this part of the symposium will be made by Zsolt Miklósvölgyi, who is joining us from New York this time. Zsolt is a critic, editor, and art writer based in Budapest, Hungary. He is editor-in-chief of Art Portal Hungary, co-editor-in-chief of the Berlin-Budapest-based art collective and publishing project Technology und das Unheimliche, T+U, and editor of the Café Babel essay journal. He holds a PhD in literary and cultural studies. And today He will talk about unarchiving Eastern futurist movements. Zsolt, I hope you can hear us.
Yes, thank you very much. I hear you very well. I hope you hear me as well.
Yeah, we can hear you. Thanks. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So let me share my screen with you since I prepared, yeah, there we go. I prepared a slideshow. So do you see the entire screen, or also including the little, you know, images of the presenters here?
We can see both. We can see well the presentation, and
okay,
we also see you.
Yes. Okay. So thank you very much, Eszter, and thank you very much for the entire OFF-Biennale team for putting together this amazing symposium. Thank you very much for Kateryna, Daša, and Matthias for the presentations. I know it's been a long day for you guys, and I really hope I'm not going to be too long or boring. So I'm just going to move really quick and maybe turn slightly focus towards more prospectful or even humorous areas of interest. So even though the symposium is titled Season of Darkness, I think there is always a kind of hope within the deepest and the darkest corner of our urgencies of our society, where humor could have a sort of potential, even subversive, transgressive, capacity to shift interest towards a more brighter and just future. So that's the reason why I have chosen for today the topic Eastern Futurism and the topic of archiving/unarchiving. And by doing so, I thought I am going to approach this project from both from a perspective of personal experiences, but also of a kind of secret underlying, how can I say, a network or example of networks for a kind of mutually shared and solidar futurity, both in and beyond our regions. So to begin with, I have to make sure that I use the 20 minutes I have with caution. So I just start with a timer. I have been participating together with an art collective called Technologie und das Unheimliche, or T+U, which we founded in 2014 in Berlin with the poet, art critic, and professor of art theory Mario Nemes, and the artist, visual artist and graphic artist Mark Fridwalski, back in 2004 when we lived together in Berlin. And we did multiple projects, and we are still active. We are actually about to celebrate our 10th anniversary next year. So I'll give you some hints of what we did by showing our website, but at the end I will also happy to share the URL for the website. The Technologie und das Unheimliche is actually an art collective, but also heavily focusing on
recording in progress,
on art publications and using zines, art books, and alternative publishing as a kind of platform for showing artistic, curatorial, or even scientific or theoretical topics. So including one of our topics that was in 2017 of our major focus. That was the Hungaro-Futurist movement. And we started as a kind of aesthetic strategy that somehow aimed at challenging the nationalist ideology of the current nationalist regime. And in order to do so, we used this kind of transformative and imaginative power of word bringing, of world writing, word creating throughout images, texts, collages, exhibitions, etc. And this is how we actually started to collaborate or actually participated in OFF-Biennale in 2021. Although I have to mention that we have also participated already in 2015 together with the artist collective, the corporation, in the first edition of OFF-Biennale by creating this pseudo or imaginative state or anti-state in a form of a techno or rave party. But in recent terms and in the context of today's talk, what was important to us is to sort of unfold the potentialities of Hungarian futurism or Hungaro-futurism in a more, let's say, collaborative way, but also in a way that is somehow embedded in a broader geocultural and geopolitical context of Eastern Europe. On the one hand, we created a magazine, an English-speaking magazine project called Xenotopia, and also a 3 days long theoretical conference or event that somehow circulated around all the topics we have tried to incorporate in the first issue of Xenotopia. And on the other hand, with an exhibition of the film artist, video artist duo Igor and Ivan Buharov, an exhibition that has been co-curated by Borbála Szalai and Mário Nemes, the Revolution Parabotany. And then this is how we actually landed in this kind of broader interest of looking at other kind of alter futurisms or ethnofuturist movements, both in terms of like curatorial projects as well as theoretical researches in and beyond contemporary philosophy, literature, etc. So the reason I'm trying to sort of outdrawing the kind of traces how this general interest of mine led to the concept or the idea of researching Eastern futurism, both as a kind of curatorial topic, but as well as a general like intellectual movement, is actually started with bumping into this book edited by Armen Avanasyan and Mahan Moalemi, and the latter one, Moalemi, who is of Iranian origin, as a sociologist who was also participating in the OFF-Biennale 2021 with the text for the Xenotopia magazine. So I was very much interested in this topic, and together with Mário Nemes, we started to invest more and more in finding out potential, let's say, comrades or let's say members for a network of other futurists both in and beyond the region. And that back at that time, Moalemi was living in Berlin, and this is how we happened to also invite him through Kristina Hunya, also a Berlin-based Hungarian curator, and we put together both the Xenotopia and also the other project that was happening sort of parallel with OFF-Biennale 2021. So whilst we were starting to research heavily on different ethno-futuristic movements, obviously we bumped into the sort of Ur movement, the original movements of or potential or possible ethno-futurist aesthetics, and that is the Afrofuturism and Sanra. So it started with our mutual shared interest in music and how music can create a kind of mythopoetic background or backdrop for envisioning alternative future scenarios. So we started to read, research, and listen more carefully to both these different Afrofuturist musicians, and as well as discussing more and more about their historical backgrounds, and this is how, for instance, we bumped into the Detroit-based Drexia techno duo, and also when it comes to recent, how can I say, mutations of Afrofuturism, for instance, also the Black Quantum Futurist movement from Philadelphia, who were also participating in the last Documenta, or DeForest Brown, I bumped into recently, who was trying to rewrite the history of techno music and techno culture from a perspective of potential Black alter or counter culture from the sense of Detroit and the struggles of the Black community. And then throughout this book, I mentioned we started to broaden our horizons, but I would say that first this was more in a sort of global or post-global scale or perspective when it came to different ethnofuturism. So after Afrofuturism and potential, like collaborators with the movement, we bumped into other forms of futurities, and one of them were, for instance, Xenofuturism. And sorry if I'm not going too much into details with regards to the various futurist movements, but I'm more happy to answer any questions if you have in the Q&A session regarding them. This is just more or less like a kind of a mapping of the abundance or the proliferation of the multiplicity of different futurist or alter-futurist artistic and aesthetic movements ever since we started researching them. So the other one was, for instance, the Gulf Futurism that envisioned this kind of like quantum leap, this 50 years period that happened in the Gulf region, this kind of like hyper-capitalist overdevelopments grasp with the subtle like post-internet aesthetic sensibility, mostly on the internet or in online communities, and we were more and more trying to figure out how to position Hungarofuturism, or we haven't talked about Eastern Futurism back then, but in this kind of like Eastern European semi-peripheral kind of point of view, how to locate or situate our interests within this kind of post-global territorialization of different futurities. So this is how, for instance, in 2018, I bumped into, because of my half Mongolian heritage, I found it very interesting that there is a kind of Mongol futurism, although it was a London art show, an exhibition, and it followed with a book from Sternberg Press that aimed at documenting the exchange processes between artists and anthropologists and offering a kind of like a critical commentary on geontology and post-capitalist futurities in the Mongolian or Inner Asian context. And also by reading a couple of articles, for instance, I have to mention Anders Kruger's writing for the After All magazine in 2017, titled Leaning on the Past, Working for the Future, that was heavily focusing on the Baltic and Finno-Ugrian ethnofuturism movements of the early 80s and 90s, especially the Estonian and, of course, the broader Baltic regions ethnofuturist movements. Avanasian's book were also, by the way, informed and sort of named after by this movement, which was, for those who are not that much familiar with the movement, was a kind of a countercultural initiative that aimed at pushing back the heavy Sovietization of the Baltic cultural landscape, and by doing so, these ethnofuturists found interest in both in the early cybernetics or cyberculture, early net art networkization, as well as at the same time in folk or rural or vernacular aesthetics and symbols and languages of their original Finno-Ugrian or Baltic folk culture. So on the one hand, they were using the early variations of the World Wide Web as a kind of safe haven, safe portal, or cyber space that is intact or not tangible from the Soviet interest. And on the other hand, they're finding interest also in symbols that are rooting back to their non-modern heritages. So it's a kind of vernacular, cybernetic, weird mixture. The problem is that after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, many members of these ethnofuturist movements and their political interests sort of shifted slightly but steadily towards the right end of the political spectrum. So this is both a kind of example as well as a kind of anti-example when it comes to, for instance, Hungaro-futurism, to avoid the kind of essentialization of nationhood, since it has been coined as a term for the very opposite, to challenge this kind of monolithic, monocultural, dominant and prevalent nationalistic narrative when it comes to history and culture, both in Hungary and beyond. So whilst we were like researching more and more these different futurities, we realized that there are several others parallelly emerging futurities that are, in a way, both, feels closer in the sense of shared struggles and mutual understandings of these struggles, and also mutual energies to change this kind of table around dominant narratives when it comes to inherited cultural narratives. So this is how, for instance, we bump into Roma futurism, as well as several other exhibitions that happened more or less. And I'm talking about a period of time from 2017 to nowadays. So when it comes to like the whole potency to see it as a kind of curatorial or art historian point of view of contemporary art, I'm talking about actually a very recent, ongoing kind of emergence of different futurities, and this is also to slowly start focusing on my presentation on the very topic how to archive these different futurities, or the multiplicity of futurities that are not necessarily and ultimately intertwining with each other, but sort of inform in a weird, sometimes loose, associative way each other. And that's a question if it is of a subject that can be archived, or how to present it. If you want to either publish a book or create a database for such emergent futuristic endeavors, how to kind of find an umbrella notion or narrative that both accommodates the differences and the multiplicities of these futurities, and at the same time sort of capable of expressing that this is something that can be a platform, or can be an initiative point for a platform for different, let's say, solidarity networks or aesthetic movements and joint efforts. So this is, in a way, what I'm doing now is sort of unboxing or mapping these trajectories I'm also personally interested in, and also showing at the same time how other peoples, how other curators, how other theoreticians are also doing same thing while I'm talking even. So this is also another example when it comes to more the Balkan region. 3 different notions. One is the Iskra Delta, which is a former Yugoslav computer company based in Ljubljana. That was the let's say the Apple computers of the Eastern Bloc, and the company dismantled after the collapse of Yugoslavia. But at this time, when it started in the 80s, it was also, representing a kind of potent, technologically advanced alternative Yugo-futurism that has been, if you're looking at from today's point of view, failed, hopefully not utterly, but for a long period of time. The other notions in Yugoslavia sort of emerged from this 13th Ljubljana graphic biennial curated by Daša Pogačar, who's also the editor-in-chief of Šum magazine, which is a theory fiction journal based also in Ljubljana. And so for the 13th Biennale of Ljubljana, they created this this magazine or theoretical reader, the 16th Šum magazine, titled Xenoslavia, which envisioned this kind of Xenoslavic futurity from a future scenario, and we wrote the present history from this point of view. And this is, by the way, interesting to mention that all these concepts, in a way, when it comes to theoretical grounding, can be traced back to the concept of ontology, the concept of critical nostalgia, and also the notion of what Derrida calls spectral poetics. Spectral poetics in the sense of thinking about utopia, thinking about the future that is already in a sense infiltrating our presence, informing our acts and interests, but not from what happened from the past. So in a kind of causal way of traditional historiography, but from this futuristic point of view, where actually future is a kind of projected vision already by its project interests or influences our present time. So it's not by accident that Yugo futurism also as a term and as a movement had been coined by another former Slovenian magazine, Maška, and they actually edited since then 2 volumes and organized also collaborative conferences with Serbian art scene and performance and theater scene. So this is how then sort of realized that if we are talking about Eastern futurism and Eastern Europe, this is not only the matter of any kind of like ethnic background. Furthermore, it's more like a historical economic kind of construction that is in a way shaped by this shared interest of the former Eastern Bloc. So this is how we then started to work more and more with former Eastern German scholars and artists and curators to see what's their kind of experience in Eastern German times and how they kind of vibe with this kind of notion of futurity or futurism within this broader Eastern context. And also...
Sorry to interrupt you, Zsolt. We don't have much time, so maybe...
Yes, I'm just about to wrap it up right now. Yeah. So this is how Kayet, which is a Romanian magazine and publishing platform, with Laura, Norma, and Petrika Mogos, we are sort of in contact with and collaboration with for a long time, or not the least ever since 2018, started to also nurture this idea of Eastern futurism, and this is how they come up with this 5th edition of their amazing Kayet project. And it's also worth of mentioning that by the generous help and support of Rita Kálmán and the Dot to Dot curatorial residency program, in 2022, Laura and Petrika came to Hungary, and they were also kind of unmapping or learning more about the Hungarian art scene, and sort of trying to also infiltrate their ideas as Kayet into the current Hungarian art scene landscape. And this is how, which is an ongoing project as we speak, this is how the idea came up by their initiation to start to put all these emerging different Eastern futurist movements into a book collection and an online archive, which is about to be made hopefully or potentially in the summer and beyond. And of course, what I was talking today is also kind of take on what kind of Eastern futurisms or Eastern futurities we can talk about, but and this would be my my final, let's say, a conclusion. It is more like an invitation to further proliferate what we would mean when we talk about Eastern futurism, rather than kind of limit it into already existing futurities. So ideally, this would be a kind of platform for a kind of cross-pollination and further proliferation of all these movements. And hopefully this would also, in a way, somehow not only foster, the imaginative capacity of the art scene, but would go into other realms of social, political, or broader cultural changes in our region. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Actually, what I wanted to ask you, you already answered. My question would have been that this website could also work as a platform to gather the people who are dealing with, either as an artist or as a curator or as a theoretician, dealing with futurism, different kind of aspects of ethno-futurism. Sorry, it's a bit late, so it's difficult to pronounce. But actually, you gave the answer that the aim is to have this platform, like a vivid platform, where besides collecting theoretical texts and exhibitions and other resources, it would be also a platform for meeting somehow and collecting.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
In a way, a sort of ongoing database, one that is not archives and stores this kind of movements and initiatives for historians or art historians only, but also for practicing artists and curators who are maybe interested in looking for potential partners, collaborators, etc. So definitely. Mm-hmm. That's also the key aim of the notion on archiving, a notion that I quoted from Wolfgang Ernst, this German media archaeologist who had this book in 2002, The Rumors of the Archive. He spoke about exploding the archive. Archive is not something that stores in a space, different variations of times and informations attached to sort of chronological happenings, but also, starts a communication.
Thank you very much. Since we are in delay, I would close this section. And thanks again for all of the participants, Daša, Matthias, Kateryna, and
Recording
Zsolt.
stopped.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And before the screening program, I would just give you 5 minutes, if it's okay, instead of 15. And then we will have a screening program introduced by Serge. But we will come back in 5 minutes. Okay? Thank you.